Good evening, everyone. Boa noite a todos. Eu sou o Simon, sou coordenador de cursos e sócio fundador da Bilingual Minds. Nós estamos hoje nessa live com o tema Inglês Jurídico, Desvendando o Direito Americano. O nosso convidado especial é o professor, advogado empresarial e professor também de inglês, Fabio Schlichting, que está falando conosco diretamente de Alter do Chão, Fábio.
Hey, Pará. Simon. Not really, Simon. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Actually, I'll go to Alter do Chão on Friday. Today I'm here in Itatiaia, right? It's right on the border of the three states, São Paulo, Minas, and Rio.
So you are in the middle of the way. Está no meio do caminho.
That's right.
Ok. Fábio, antes da gente entrar no tema propriamente dito da live, fala um pouco para nós assim, sobre a tua experiência com o direito e também com o ensino, né? Porque você tem essas duas habilidades e experiências.
Should I do it in English, Portuguese, Simon? What do you think?
You can do it in English, slowly, right?
All right.
And if there are any difficult questions, I will ask you to change to Portuguese.
All right. So my life was, let's say I started out as a teacher for a long time. So I've been a teacher for a long time, right? Teaching English to all sorts of people, right? From regular students up to business people and also lawyers and etc., right? Prosecutors, judges. And as a lawyer, I've been working with business law. My undergraduate is law, right? And then later on, I took my graduate in civil law and also criminal law, right? And I also have a master's in business law, right? Basically, my whole project was about corruption, right? So the corruption systems, right? Comparing like developing countries like Brazil, Latin America, and also countries in which the rate of corruption is real low, like let's say Sweden, Denmark, Norway, okay?
Ok, então a gente pode ver que você tem várias áreas do direito em que você tem experiência e tem atuado, estudado também.
That's right, that's right. I also work with contracts, right? As a lawyer, I have a lot of clients from the United States that buy property here in Brazil, right? Since our system here is a bit complex, there's a lot of need of a lawyer to help you, to tell you what to do, what not to do in Brazil. Because if you think about the systems, right, they're quite different, let's say, right? The American system and the Brazilian system. Even though you were a lawyer in the United States, things are quite different here where we live in Brazil. Right?
Okay.
Falar um pouquinho português então, Simon. Em relação à minha experiência com o direito, eu sou advogado basicamente na área contratual e também eu trabalho com investidores americanos, normalmente americanos, que fazem investimentos no Brasil. Então, pessoas, né, que compram apartamentos, casas, propriedades aqui no Brasil, justamente nessa parte extrajudicial.
Ok, very good. Hoje, como o nosso foco é especificamente o direito americano, então nós vamos fazer o caminho inverso, né? Em vez de ser os americanos a virem lidar com o direito brasileiro, nós vamos lidar com o direito americano, é o tema da nossa live, e é também um tema de um mini curso que nós estamos lançando a partir de hoje à noite, que ajuda os profissionais da área do direito no Brasil a lidarem, entenderem e interagirem melhor com o direito americano, quem tem que interagir profissionalmente com os Estados Unidos. Então, por causa desse curso que a gente está lançando, criamos essa live para abordar alguns dos principais temas em que as pessoas parecem ter dúvidas, não entender bem. Muitas das perguntas que a gente vai abordar aqui, elas vieram de alunos nossos. Nós tivemos antes na Bilingual Minds e também com o professor Fábio um curso, mas esse foi um curso de longa duração, abrangendo mais áreas do direito, que foi o Legal English. E um dos módulos do Legal English era exatamente os fundamentos do direito americano, Fundamentals of U.S. Law. Então, Fábio, fala um pouquinho então dessa parte, assim, sobre o direito americano. Alguma coisa assim bem básica, que seja assim, uma diferença importante entre a maneira como ele é tratado e exercido no Brasil e nos Estados Unidos.
Sure. If you think about the students we had here before in the course, right, we noticed that most of them have been lawyers for a long time, judges, right, prosecutors. We even had some law students, right? People were still taking law in university. We had students from Brazil, right, Simon? Remember? And also foreigners. We had students from Africa taking the course, right? We had international students too, who are also judges in other countries and wanted to know more about the Brazilian system, right? And of course, our focus is always American, the American legal system, but it's also important to compare systems, right? So if you think about regular English, right, what people look for when they're studying English is that they focus on the language, pronunciation of words, and etc., right, expressions. But when you're taking a course like Inglês Jurídico, right, or when you take Direito Americano, right, the American system and all, right, what is important to keep in mind is the terminology, right, so the words used, the expressions, and also the language structures, right, because if you hear an engineer speaking the language, that's one thing. If you listen to a business person, that's another thing. If you listen to a lawyer or you read a legal text, that's very different too, right? So if you think about it, yeah, let's say the language is a bit more formal, right? The writing style is a little bit different, right? The technical vocabulary is what makes it special, right? And the precise language used for contracts, let's say, for court documents, legal proceedings, right? So if you think about it, dealing with the language is just a tool to make yourself understood in this area that is so specific, which is the American legal system. And comparing systems, of course, we have the civil law, we also have the common law. Americans usually treat new cases based on older cases, right? So they got some landmark cases. So based on those, sometimes you have like 200-year-old cases that are still used nowadays. And based on those, they make decisions. Judges make decisions, right? If that's still valid, if that still makes sense in the American society, right, they use those systems, right? Those landmark cases, let's say, when you think about abortion, right, it's also important to think about Roe versus Wade, which is a landmark case in that sense, right? And of course, all the possibilities connected to that, right? The way it was vetoed and how it works nowadays, how you can go to states and try to apply that, right? How you can divide federal law and state law. So all of those things, Simon, make it make the study of legal English a specific thing, not difficult, specific, right? But I'm pretty sure that most people who look for a course like this, they already have all that background, right? They've worked with this, they know the terminology, let's say in Portuguese, in Spanish, in any language they work with. And the only thing we have to do is to apply all that knowledge into a new language, which is English. And of course, all these key elements we have, like pronunciation, etc., that's also covered by the course.
Something that is fascinating for a layperson like me was exactly the vocabulary, the terminology that you use in law, because knowing English, knowing general English, really does not help when you have to deal with legal situations, legal dealings, right? Falando rapidamente em português, é uma das razões que a gente hoje trabalha muito com o inglês específico para as áreas profissionais, porque você deve ter um inglês base, um inglês de uso geral, mas isso não significa que você vai poder agir profissionalmente com eficácia se você não entende os termos. O meu vocabulário de inglês pode ser muito bom, mas ao longo do curso que eu acompanhei como coordenador, quando nós fizemos o Legal English, eu descobri que muitas das palavras que eu conhecia com um certo significado, na área legal, eles tinham um outro significado bem diferente, né? Então, por isso é tão importante o estudo do inglês específico para essa área profissional. Aliás, vou aproveitar, inclusive, a pausa aqui, falando em português. Peço para as pessoas que estão acompanhando a gente na live, para curtirem a live, compartilharem o link com os amigos, porque eu acho que mais pessoas vão se beneficiar muito disso. E o Fábio é uma pessoa extremamente capacitada. Eu fui coordenador de curso e saí do curso quase como um paralegal, né, Fábio? Um amateur lawyer, de tanto que eu aprendi com o curso quando o Fábio foi nosso professor durante o Legal English. But now, specifically talking about the fundamentals of US law, let's talk about the questions that people normally have, the doubts that people have about the American legal or judicial system. Let me ask you one question myself, and then people can ask different questions. People, you can use the chat, the YouTube chat, to make your own questions. And I would recommend and stimulate people to try to write the questions in English. That would be really interesting to practice your English during this live. Ok, gente? Coloque as perguntas que vocês quiserem fazer sobre essa questão do sistema legal americano, do direito nos Estados Unidos, e tentem fazer em inglês. Tentem escrever em inglês no chat do live no YouTube. Mas eu vou começar fazendo a minha pergunta primeiro, ok? Fábio, we know that in the United States, the state laws are very strong. It's not just the federal legislature, the state legislature is very strong as well, okay? Could you please explain what is the difference between federal and state law in the United States?
Yeah, sure. Simon, I don't know if my connection is that good because I'm in this mountainous area here, so please forgive me if I freeze right every now and then, but just let me know if that happens. But let's do it then. So far, it's been working fine, right?
Yes, so far so good.
Okay. All right. So if you think about it, Simon, when you compare the Brazilian system to the American system, right? Let's say one of the main differences is there is federal law in the United States and there is state law. And if you think about it, it doesn't just mean that it means that it's just two different levels, right? But the creation and the themes covered by these two different groups, they're different, right? When you think about the federal law, right, it is created by the national government, right, and it applies across all the states. Okay, so it covers all the states, and it deals with issues that affect the whole country, right? So what if you think about talking about our students who took the course with us previously, right? A theme like immigration is covered by federal law, right? So it's a theme that the federation thinks about, right? So the country thinks about. So they create laws, and these laws are used across the United States, right? Another thing is national security, for instance. That's also covered by federal law, right? Interstate commerce, right? Interstate commerce, federal law. And constitutional rights, okay? So that's one of the groups. The other group we have is state laws, as we just mentioned before, right? And that's created by individual state governments. So thinking about the difficulties they have in their own state, like let's say Texas. Texas probably has certain problems that New York does not have, and vice versa. So thinking of that, and also the way that people think, right? So people who live in Texas think a certain way, they vote differently, they have specific politics. So the way the state is run, right, also affects the law of those states, all right? And if you think about it, things like property is covered by state law. It's not federal law, right? If you think about education is basically state law as well, right? Family law is state law, local crimes as well. So, and when there is a conflict, Simon, since you mentioned that you were a paralegal, right? Of course, it does before. You've had such a long experience with English as a teacher, as a coordinator. I know you for such a long time, right? But when it comes to the language, that's one thing. When it comes to specifics of the language, let's say legal English, that's another thing. You have to study everything connected to that, and they're not really, let's say, if you speak a certain language, doesn't mean that you know legal English, or you know, like, let's say, medical English. They're different areas, right? But when there is this conflict between state law and federal law, coming back to the context, right? There is this supremacy of the federal law. Okay, so federal law prevails, right? State laws. Every time we have a little problem that is local, that is a state problem, federal. If there is the same theme covered by both state and federal law, there is the supremacy of the federal law over the state law. Okay?
Okay.
So,
sounds good.
Tentando falar um pouquinho em português então, Simon. Então, basicamente, o próprio conteúdo do direito americano, ele é diferenciado entre temas relacionados à jurisdição federal e outros à estadual. E com base nisso, quando há um conflito entre ambas, a federal se sobressai, né? Ela prevalece.
Excellent. Very good, Fabio. I believe we have questions from somebody watching us on YouTube. Eu vou pedir para o pessoal do nosso apoio técnico para colocar na tela uma das perguntas. Não sei se eles podem colocar aí, se não, eu tenho mais perguntas. Olha aqui. Essa foi uma expressão que eu também aprendi durante o nosso curso e que eu sei que é muito importante, é um princípio muito importante na lei americana, né? Então, Fábio, what is the principle of stare decisis?
Okay. That's kind of connected to what we mentioned before, Simon, right? When there is a tribunal, right, following certain precedents that were established in previous cases, right? That has to be used, that has to be kept, all right? So let's say recently in the United States, every state decides on abortion, unlike it was before, all right? And for you to have this guarantee that all these decisions still make sense nowadays, previous decisions have to be used for newer cases. Of course, you can innovate. You can think about possible differences. Let's say there was abortion in the past, but they did not mention abortion of fetuses with a certain disease. So based on this previous case, right, these tribunals, these judges make newer decisions, right? But that doesn't mean that it is absolute, all right? So we have certain decisions that try to break these precedents, right? I don't know, maybe I can use one technical term, which is justices, right? We have regular judges, but then we have like the judges from the Supreme Court who are called the justices. They can break that. So thinking about the Constitution of the United States, they can make decisions, newer decisions, based on older ones, but they're the ones who really read the law, who read the Constitution. If you think about the American Constitution, that's a lot shorter compared to the Brazilian Constitution, but most of the principles are in there, and they're still used nowadays by judges and justices in the United States. All right? So, falando em português, resumidamente, esse é um princípio que ele é muito importante, pois no sistema americano os precedentes têm uma importância muito forte, certo? Então, as decisões tomadas anteriormente, elas devem ser utilizadas nessas novas decisões. Por mais que o caso não seja exatamente igual ao que aconteceu há 100 ou 200 anos, as ideias básicas, os princípios já foram dados anteriormente. Quando você pensa, por exemplo, em Roe versus Wade, que fala sobre o aborto, então, todas as ideias básicas relacionadas ao aborto já foram dadas lá atrás. Não quer dizer que isso é absoluto, tanto que isso foi quebrado recentemente nos Estados Unidos, né? Tem mais uma jurisdição propriamente federal e ela é agora, nesse momento, estadual. E isso vai mudando ao longo do tempo, deixando realmente o inglês, o direito, em algo, é considerado algo realmente vivo, mas sempre pautado em decisões anteriores.
Ok. Excellent. Very interesting, Fábio. Uma próxima pergunta, se tiver alguém aí. Vamos colocar a próxima pergunta para o Fábio. Okay, what is the concept of separation of powers in the American legal system? Separação de poderes é um conceito que a gente tem no Brasil também, né? Mas o que temos no American legal system, Fábio, that you can talk about?
Yeah, one thing, Simon, we can think about principles, right, across the world, right, around the world, sorry, that are used. Let's say this separation, right, which is very old and is used in the United States. We also have it here in Brazil. They also have that in Africa. They use that in Europe as well. Unlike religious systems like the Muslim world, right, in which the law is connected to religion, right? In the Western world, we have the separation, right? We have the executive branch, which is the branch that basically makes things work. Let's say there is a president, so he's the one in charge of applying all the laws that they have in that country. Okay, so the executive branch make things work. Okay. Then we have the legislative branch, which is the one that creates the laws. All right. So, and also, right, there's the Senate, right? We can talk about that in details during the course, but there is the legislative branch, which is basically the one making the laws, thinking about how society functions and what things are covered nowadays. Problems that we have now in 2024. We did not have, let's say, 20 years ago, or maybe 100 years ago, right? But the principles are in there, right? There's the stare decisis principle. But they're the ones, right? The legislative branch, the ones who are making these laws, changing laws, right? Creating laws, right? And there is the judicial branch, right? They're the ones who enforce these laws, okay? So there is this law created by the legislative branch. So how do you make it work, right? How do you make decisions based on that law, right? How do you make decisions based on those principles, on those precedents, all right? Now, for example, we think about artificial intelligence, which is a very new, a very interesting topic, right? It's very hot in the moment. Everyone is talking about it, right? Especially here in Brazil, social media as well. All of that, right, goes through the legislative branch, is decided by the judicial branch, right? And there is the executive branch that makes the country work, okay? The same principles are found here in Brazil. So it's very important for you to compare all the time, because then you go like, well, all right, is it 100% the same? Is it just like in the United States? Do we have some nuances here in Brazil? Or is it applied differently here? Do we have two chambers like they do in the United States? How does it work, let's say, in other countries? So it's very important to compare, because that way you get into the topic, you practice the language. I noticed that students of ours who work with American law, right? Students of ours who were prosecutors, students of ours who were judges. There's always something new to learn from that. You get the case, you read the decision, you think about something different that you did not have in your own case while you work as a lawyer in your own country, okay? So it's always important to keep in mind that the basics, okay, they might look the same, but the way you think they're applied, it goes differently because the systems are different too. There are precedents in the United States, that's the basis. Stare decisis is a principle in there. Here is something new. It's quite new if you think about stare decisis, right? We have like a group of laws that are so long, right? If you think about our constitution, it's so dense And it also covers topics that maybe they're not interested, right? So do you think a specific school in Rio de Janeiro is going to be that important for the whole country, right? So it's important to analyze the whole context in which the Brazilian law is created, but the principles of the three branches, right, are quite the same.
Okay. You want to make a little comment in Portuguese?
Então, o que a gente notou com os nossos alunos anteriormente, Simon, foi justamente essa questão de haver essa comparação natural, né? Essa comparação natural entre os sistemas. Então, por mais que você perceba que alguns princípios, alguns fundamentos sejam muito similares, o pulo do gato está realmente relacionado a essa questão do que há de diferente entre um sistema e outro. De que maneira eu posso ler um novo caso, utilizando inglês, casos americanos, comparando aos casos brasileiros, certo? Então, obviamente que o expertise que os nossos alunos, né, juízes, advogados, estudantes de direito, procuradores têm em relação a direito é inegável, são profissionais da área. No entanto, fazer tudo isso dentro do inglês e no sistema americano é o que nós tentamos promover no nosso curso.
I have a question before we go back to our watchers, because you mentioned the American Constitution. And the American Constitution is known as a very concise document, right? It's very short, and it's probably one of the longest constitutions in place around the world, right? Is it the longest? Do you know?
Simon, this thing, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. If you think about the American Constitution, it was written in 1787. I'm not very good at math. You have to help me with that. Right? 1787. Well, the viewers do the math, right? 1787, that's when it was written, and it was ratified in 1788. All right?
Wow.
It's over 200 years old, right?
Yes, it is.
So, if you think about it, I think it's one of the oldest constitutions in the world, right? So it was written in there and it's still in use. That's the most important thing. If it was written in 1787, right, and not used anymore because it's just too old, that's one thing. But thinking about the Constitution and all the amendments made later on, right, which kind of innovate, bring a few new topics that were not covered by the original text of the Constitution, right? The Constitution, with the amendments, they make it one of the oldest constitutions still in use, right? If you think about ours here in Brazil, 1988, the viewers have to do the math. I'm not very good at it. It's a brand new constitution. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. I'm just saying that it's very interesting that these words, right, or this pact that they had so many years ago is still covered nowadays. It still functions, right? It's still in use. We always go back to the original texts, right, to submit texts. Judges as well when they make their decisions, right? So the framework is the same, right? The powers are the same. The rights of citizens are basically the same. And of course, there is a lot of innovation, right? If you think about the culture of segregation they had in the past, that changed, right? With some precedents, right? That we're gonna cover during the course. We can say that those were added, right, through amendments in the American Constitution, would make it, in my opinion, very interesting, right? And remember, we never have this feeling of that's right, that's wrong, that's the way it is, right? Brazilian law has, in the Brazilian system, we had so many constitutions throughout time, right? Say every 30 years, every 40 years, we have a new constitution, right? So why does that happen here in Brazil, right? So these differences are always important to be taken into account, right? And during the course, I noticed that students always get surprised when you talk about the number of years, right? How old the Constitution is, right? The topics covered, the number of amendments, and that it is still in use nowadays. It's really fascinating to think about. Não em português, Simon, right?
Sure.
A Constituição americana, ela é consideravelmente antiga. Não sei dizer para você se realmente ela é a mais antiga, mas ela está em uso ainda. Ela foi escrita em 1787 e ratificada em 1788. Tá? Então, se você considerar a Constituição, junto com essas emendas que foram feitas posteriormente, ela é uma Constituição razoavelmente curta, certo? Mas com uma aplicabilidade muito alta.
Yeah. It's the supreme law, right, Fabio? It is used as the supreme law of the United States.
That's right. That's right. And when you think about our country, went through a lot here in Brazil, the history, right, here in Brazil, right? If you think about the dictatorship time, right, the time in which we had 2 world wars, right, how it functioned here, local presidents, all this internal conflicts we had. The American Constitution is really the supreme law, because the federation in the United States, that's a funny thing to mention, Sam, because the Brazilian system, right, of federation was copied from the United States, because in the United States they had different states that function like independent countries, but they wanted to be together. Then they wanted to become the United States of America. So it worked naturally. So the federation was a big pact, right, signed by all these different states, saying that, well, we're better together, we're stronger together. Because of that, we have to have this legal document, which is the Constitution, right? And that's going to be our supreme document, right? It's like a big pact signed in that country. Unlike Brazil, in which we wanted to copy the system, but we already were a big nation. We were already one big chunk, right? But because it worked so well in the United States, it was copied by Brazil. Of course, we cannot say that it functions the same way, right? We have presidents too, right? We have the judicial branch, we have the legal branch, the legislative branch, we have the executive branch, right? So we have all of that, but we know when you think about politics and law are really intertwined. So if you think about this interaction, right, that politics has over law and law over politics, things function quite differently here, right? But in the end, we can say that there is a bit of the feeling of, okay, certain things work very well in the States. Why not applying that here in Brazil, and vice versa? We notice that Americans always see good things around the world, and why not using these good things from around the world in their own country, right? But as you mentioned before, that's really the supreme charter, the supreme document of the country, right? And if you think about the Supreme Court, they're the ones in charge of taking care of that, of analyzing cases, right, precedents, and saying, okay, well, that makes sense, we're still using that, or, well, that doesn't make sense anymore, we have to make a new law. Then they send it to the legislative branch to create newer laws, okay? But the Supreme Court and the Constitution, they're the ones who are like telling the country that, okay, this Constitution still makes sense in this country, let's still use it, right? Let's align forces. Let's all get together to make it a good nation. As we know, economically speaking, it is still the strongest nation. And that's why I think most students are still studying legal English, because they're either, with clients in the United States, or they're like representing companies in Brazil, right? Maybe they're judges in Brazil, but they're just interested in the topic, comparing systems, right? Maybe adapting certain things, of course, thinking about considering the whole system here in Brazil. But we noticed that it's nice to have this close connection with a different country and trying to make things work here in our jobs in Brazil, because everything is connected nowadays. We know that judges go to the States to take courses. We also have Americans watching the elections in Brazil, seeing how it works here, right? If they're good or not, let's not get into the topic, but they're here to watch, right? Same way we are in their country, observing the way things go there. But yeah, right. The Constitution is the supreme document in the United States. Em português, Simon.
Go ahead.
Né, estão praticando o inglês. Realmente, a Constituição americana, ela é o documento fundamental, né, que realmente uniu os estados, né, dos Estados Unidos, que eram considerados estados independentes inicialmente, e que posteriormente notaram que eram melhores juntos, e por isso criaram esse documento como se fosse um pacto, realmente um pacto federativo, né, e através dessa carta, que foi a Constituição, eles formaram uma nação muito forte, que economicamente falando, hoje é a mais forte ainda. Então, os nossos alunos, eles têm esse contato mesmo muito próximo, muitos que fazem o curso conosco, eles trabalham diretamente com empresas americanas ou representam empresas no Brasil, fazem negócios, assinam contratos. Então, a necessidade de conhecer esse sistema vai muito além da própria língua, né? Ela entra realmente nesse conhecimento muito técnico, legal, do sistema americano. Não é, como você falou anteriormente, não é apenas traduzir o que nós temos em português para o inglês, não. É um novo estudo, é como se você estivesse estudando engenharia mecânica, agora você estuda engenharia elétrica. Você estudou em português, o direito, agora você vai estudar o direito em inglês, né? Então, são sistemas diferentes, com uma lógica diferenciada, mas todo esse aparato prévio que os nossos alunos têm, né, trabalhando nas suas específicas áreas, acabam realmente por ajudar nesse novo conhecimento. Então, facilita muito se você já trabalha na área. Se você é aluno de direito, nada impede de você já poder desenvolver essas técnicas também nesse novo idioma que eles estão praticando.
É isso. E aproveito, então, que você tocou no assunto para lembrar de novo que, ao final dessa conversa, nós vamos disponibilizar um novo curso chamado Inglês Jurídico, o Inglês Jurídico, abordando o direito americano, né? Como você usa o inglês dentro do direito americano, conhecendo o sistema judicial americano, tratando desses fundamentos que são importantes para você conhecer bem quando você vai interagir profissionalmente com os Estados Unidos, né? É fascinante isso que você tocou, Fábio, sobre a questão da Constituição americana ter sido criada tão cedo dentro da evolução política e social dos Estados Unidos, porque talvez seja isso realmente que lhe dá essa característica de ser um pacto, um verdadeiro pacto, né, entre as pessoas, e acho que isso a torna muito mais forte, talvez uma das razões que ela está aí até agora. Agora, tem algo que, ao longo do nosso curso, do nosso Legal English, eu também aprendi e não conhecia, que eu acho que é interessante trazer aqui como pergunta, me colocando também na posição de aluno. The difference, or the differences, between common law and statutory law, right? You have these two things, common law and statutory law in the United States. Can you talk about it, Fabio?
Sure. I mentioned something about this earlier, right, Simon? So when you think about common law, right, what is the source of common law, right? So common law is based on judicial decisions, right? So precedents, right, set by the courts. So there was a new case in the past, specific court over there made a decision. So if you think about common law, they use this precedent right nowadays. So the judges interpret this past ruling, right, and apply them to newer cases, right, with similar facts. They don't have to be 100%. They don't have to be equal, right? But they have to be similar, right? So common law, let's say that it evolves this case by case, and it's primarily unwritten. Unwritten in the sense that, okay, there was a case that we think about, right? There is a written decision, of course, but that's in their minds, you know. This judicial decision isn't there, okay? When you think about statutory law, Simon, you can see these legislative bodies like the Congress and state legislatures. and they create these statutes, right? So like the Congress and state legislatures, statutes are formal, they're written laws, and they're passed by lawmakers, right, and codified in legal codes, right? So that's one thing, that's the source, okay? So one comes from these precedents, the other comes from this formal and written laws passed by lawmakers. And when you think about the creation of these two different systems, we have, like in the common law, we can say that it emerges from court ruling over time, right? So when judges make decisions, they create this precedents. Okay, so the creation is by the judges. They make law, let's say, right? By deciding on these cases. Statutory law is a bit different, and when you think about the creation and the development of that, let's say that statutory law is created through a formal legislative process. When we're talking about branches before, remember, Simon, there's the executive, legislative, the judicial branch. Statutory law comes from the legislative branch, right? So, so the elected topic is drafted, right? They debate that, and then they pass the laws, all right? And when you think about the flexibility of these two systems, right, we can say that common law, it evolves with each court decision. Okay, so courts can modify and reinterpret legal principles, right? So some judges made the decision in the past. These other judges, right, they start making decisions a bit differently, reflecting upon these changes, right, throughout time, newer circumstances, right, and making decisions a bit different from those in the past, right? And when you think about the statutory law, right, it's a bit more rigid, right? So for you to change a law created by the Congress of the United States, right, when it goes through this legislative process, it's a bit more difficult to change it. There is change, of course, law changes over time, of course, but it requires legislative amendment or they have to think about it, right? And to change this is a bit more complicated, a bit more complex, right? When you think about common law, let me try to give you some examples, Simon. Many areas of contract law, property law, for example, right? They are rooted in common law, right? But when you think about criminal law, for example, right, tax law, right, like regulations like the Civil Rights Act, right, all of that comes from statutory law, right? So it looks simple in a way, but when you start researching the topic, right, studying also this, if you get this very important scholars of law, right, you can discover that, well, it looks simple, but taking a course is going to help you, right? Reading more about it, it's going to bring you a lot of details that you do not have just by, mentioning this in 1 or 2 minutes, of course.
Excellent. Yes, please, Fabio. Short summary in Portuguese.
Tá, rapidamente, então, gente. Em relação ao common law, a gente pode dizer que ele é pautado em precedentes, certo? Ao passo que o direito estatutário, né, ele é pautado em um sistema que passa por um processo até que a lei seja codificada, certo? Então, os processos são diferenciados, certo? Ao passo que common law vem de uma decisão judicial, no direito estatutário, as leis vêm de um processo que passa pelo legislativo. Basicamente isso, Simon.
Excellent. Acho que temos alguma pergunta mais no chat. Se o pessoal, Hamilton, puder colocar para nós aqui. Aqui. Fabio, how do due process and equal protection under the law function in the United States?
Okay. Simon, when you get these two systems, right, the American system and the Brazilian system, right, it's natural to compare, right? And for certain people, they have the feeling that we notice this with students, right? Oh, things don't work very well here in Brazil. Things work much better in the United States. But when you think about it, right, there are certain certain things that students might have the feeling that probably in Brazil it might work better. Remember, we invited these lawyers who have they have this law firm in New York. That was New York and Florida, right?
And Florida, exactly.
So one thing that was very interesting to me was that over there, it's possible to discuss family law, right? You can make decisions together, just the parties getting together, right? I'm not going to give the technical terms right now, but so the father of a child, the mother of a child can make decisions, and based on those decisions, they can get into an agreement and decide on whatever they think is right for that case. Unlike Brazil, here we need the presence of the state to decide on family law, right? There's no decision made by a mother and by a dad that could become a rule without the supervision of the state. Mm-hmm. So when you think about this, the guarantee you have, right, the protection you have in these two different systems might be different. So in my opinion, the system here works a bit better. So it's in favor of the child, right? Whatever they have in their bank account, property, right, and etc. Okay, that's also important to be decided here in Brazil, but the child is the most important, right? That's just one of the things. When you think about companies, right, the system, you have a due process. When you ask me about the due process, mm-hmm. right? So we have a process to be followed. There is a certain way, right? A company goes bankrupt officially and legally, right, in the United States. It's not just by going there, okay, I declare that I'm going bankrupt. Now I'm bankrupt. Nope, doesn't work like that. You have a due process to be followed, right? You have procedures, right, to be followed. Right, so all of that is given by law. All right. Mm-hmm. Of course, you have all this freedom in the United States, freedom of speech and etc. Right, liberty and etc. Freedom, right? But when it comes to law, things work a bit differently, right? So the due process must be respected. I cannot just okay, I want to get divorced. Okay, I'm divorced. Bye. See you around. So we kind of divide more or less what we have, and that's it. Or let's say I want to open this new business and I'm going to protect the environment my way, right? So yeah, there's sewers here in my company, right? We do it this way. It's the best machine, whatever. In Europe, I'm going to apply it here in Brazil or in the United States. It doesn't work like that. You have environmental law, right? You have environmental law decisions in the States telling, right, how this has to be done, right? So the due process goes both ways, Simon. It goes like on how to rule things, how to run businesses, how to write contracts, or how the breach of contracts work, right? But in the end, you have the other part of your question, which is the equal protection. All right. So businesses have to be protected equally. All right. So, okay, let's say you have $1 billion. I have $500 million. Okay, I know it's a big difference, right? The money I have is a lot less than you, right? But we have to have the same protection from the state, right? In case we want to go through a breach of contract, there is a specific tribunal for us, or a specific court for us to bring our decisions, right, on how to break this contract, how much money I have to pay. Okay, is it going to be in your bank account? Can it be done here in Brazil through PIX, let's say, right? In the United States, we have different systems that can be done. Can I just pass one of the companies I have to you and sign a little contract in here? So all this procedure, Simon, right? All this due process is necessary to guarantee equal protection to companies. So one company cannot have advantages over another company. And also for civilians as well, right? So how can you get married, right? So how can you render services to the state, right? So the due process is a way of reaching this equal protection right? That it's something that is very important in the United States, right? You know, teaching English for so long too, and being a coordinator for so long, Simon, that the Americans are always worried about freedom and equality, right? So the United States of America is there to protect you. We're all equal, right? No matter the color of your skin, no matter if you're rich or poor, right? People have to be treated equally, right? So, colocando em português então, Simon, basicamente. O due process, vou colocar o termo em inglês, os nossos visitantes, participantes aqui da live vão verificar esse termo. O due process é um caminho, né? Então, vou dar o termo, tá, Simon? Inicialmente vou dar. O devido processo legal é uma maneira de você chegar a essa proteção de todos perante a lei. É algo que no Brasil nós também temos, só que nos Estados Unidos é algo intrínseco à própria cultura americana. Então, não houve um documento, como no Brasil, a Constituição de 88, que falou que nós somos iguais, né? É algo que realmente está no sangue dos americanos, é algo muito valioso para eles. Então, a possibilidade de você falar o que você pensa em público, dar as suas opiniões, né? E também saber que você é protegido pelo Estado, ou punido pelo Estado, né? Nós temos essas duas faces da mesma moeda, leva realmente a uma proteção igualitária, na verdade, dos cidadãos americanos ou das pessoas jurídicas também em relação à lei.
Muito bem. Nós estamos chegando no nosso horário aí de 1 hora, então, se não tiver alguma pergunta importante, ou alguma pergunta, na verdade, qualquer pergunta que tenha no chat aí, do nosso pessoal da técnica que possa passar para nós, eu queria agradecer a presença do Fábio, foi extremamente didático, claro, e mostrou, assim, apenas assim, a superfície e a casca de tanto conteúdo interessante, e é isso que a gente está fazendo nessa live. Nós queremos divulgar o curso que estamos lançando de inglês jurídico sobre fundamentos do direito nos Estados Unidos. Depois vamos colocar no chat o link para uma página informativa sobre o curso, e também depois a live vai ficar gravada, vai ficar no YouTube. Na descrição da live também vai ter o link para o acesso a essa página. Fábio, algo mais que você queira dizer? Something else you want to say to our viewers?
I just don't know how long I still have, like a minute or more, Simon?
No, that's okay. That's all right.
Okay. Simon, I think that here in Brazil, right, we find a lot of different courses teaching English, right? But that's just a language if you think about it. So, okay, everybody knows verb to be. So there's verb to be 1, 2, a million, right? That's just the basics, right? And if you think about it, people want a lot more than that. Let's say someone has the doctorate in a certain area, right? Has postdoctorate in a specific area. They don't want to learn verb to be. They want to go deeper into the language. They want to discuss things that people don't usually discuss in a regular English class. And teaching regular English for so long, I know it's important. I'm still a regular English teacher, right? But thinking about this Inglês Jurídico course, the approach is different, right? That's, in my opinion, Simon, for people who want to take something seriously, right? People don't just want to, attend classes and, okay, I want to show this diploma to my boss, because many of them are their own bosses. And for others, their boss is the state. So there's no person who's their boss, right? People who want to go deeper into that, I think that's the course for them, especially because there's so much material, right, Simon? If you get all these landmark cases, they're available for students to read, to interpret carefully, compare to the Brazilian system. And for me, what I have to say to you is it's important that people take a course like this, or people who study legal English take it seriously, because it's not just studying the language, right?
Fabio, you said something really important there. I wanted to go back and do it in Portuguese now, to make it absolutely clear. Você falou sobre a importância de um curso assim para os alunos e para quem leva muito a sério estudar e se preparar bem profissionalmente, e como que esse curso ajuda esses alunos?
Então, sabe, pela nossa experiência, falando, né, dos alunos, especialmente os estrangeiros, né? Os alunos estrangeiros que nós tivemos, que têm esse contato muito forte com os Estados Unidos, eles acharam uma dificuldade, inclusive nos próprios países deles, em encontrar material, seja escrito, seja com professores, que possa realmente atender a essa demanda, porque eles têm todo esse conhecimento técnico nas línguas deles. Então, eles não querem aprender direito, eles querem aprender esse misto entre a língua, né, todas as possibilidades e dificuldades dentro de uma língua, e conectar isso ao direito americano. O direito dos países deles, eles já sabem. Então, a meu ver, Simon, esse curso é um curso sério, não é um curso para ser feito por quem quer, tenho só uma vontade, estou com o mês de julho, setembro, novembro, dezembro livres e agora vou fazer esse curso. Não, né? É um curso que exige um estudo aprofundado. Então, as pessoas que trabalham, os operadores do direito, eles têm por base a leitura e a escrita. Então, são pessoas que têm realmente muita facilidade em escrever e ler nas línguas, né, dos seus países. No entanto, ao ler isso em inglês, né, não só em inglês, ao ler isso com material legal americano, realmente não é uma coisa que você faz em 10 minutos, e não é para mostrar para o seu professor, e não é para imprimir o certificado para mostrar para o seu chefe, porque muitos nem têm chefe, muitos deles, né, não têm nem supervisores, eles têm os próprios negócios, ou a pessoa a quem eles realmente se reportam é um supervisor, mas que está em nome do país, né? Uma pessoa que trabalha para o Estado, por exemplo, aqui no Brasil. Então, a percepção que eu tenho, Simon, é de que quem faz um curso como esse já começa com um nível muito alto de conhecimento. O curso de Direito no Brasil é um curso de 5 anos, então já começa aí a nossa linha de corte, são pessoas realmente altamente qualificadas, com um estudo realmente aprofundado, né? E obviamente estamos fazendo esse curso porque querem algo sério. Então, né, esse curso foi montado justamente com esse perfil, né? Não é fácil você achar um profissional do direito, é muito mais difícil, né, Simon, achar um profissional do direito que fale inglês fluentemente, ou então que tenha uma sinergia tão boa quanto a que nós temos. Então, é um curso para pessoas que querem levar isso a sério.
Exatamente. Então, mais uma vez, esse é Inglês Jurídico, Fundamentos do Direito nos Estados Unidos. É um curso de 7 videoaulas, é um curso curto, ele é relativamente rápido de assistir em termos de videoaulas, mas ele tem material de apoio também para você poder se aprofundar mais. E temos essa condição especial de lançamento hoje. É um curso que de R$ 397 ele está sendo vendido por apenas 12 de R$ 19,70, ou seja, R$ 197 à vista. É uma oportunidade e o link vai estar, então, disponível aí no chat e depois na descrição do vídeo. Nós estamos fechando exatamente 1 hora, nosso objetivo. Eu quero agradecer a presença de todos que estiveram conosco. Fábio, thank you so much. As always, it's a pleasure to work with you.
Likewise, man. Likewise. It's always a pleasure to talk to you too.
Thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. It was great to have you with us.